Hi everyone, my name is Trevor Pyle. I'm a director of product marketing here at Quantum Metric, and I could not be more excited to speak with you all today. Today we are talking about something that's near and dear to my heart, maintaining the field connection. So we're talking about relationship. It's a little soft, but it's really, really impactful if you can do it right. And we're going to give you some tactical ways to create these amazing relationships with sales, and then how you can use that relationship to bolster some of the product marketing programs that you care about, your internal stakeholders care about, and at the end of the day, your customers care about. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. Going to learn a few things today, but there's a couple high-level buckets that we're going to be focusing on. So first, we're going to focus on how to build field relationships from scratch and really what the power of availability means. Then we're going to talk about how do we build the internal channels that break through the noise. We know that salespeople are constantly inundated with information. How do we make sure that we're being heard? And then lastly, how do we have the attention to detail and the collaboration that creates really, really compelling messages that get through those channels and get heard by sales? All right, so we're going to do that. But first of all, you're probably wondering, who's this Trevor guy? I wonder that sometimes too. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll get into it. So as I mentioned, I'm a product marketer. I'm based out here in Colorado, Denver, Colorado. Quantum Metric is a Colorado-based company, so that means I enjoy all of the typical outdoor things in terms of mountain biking and skiing. But on a bit more of my background, I am a grad school dropout, as I've listed here. So I have a science-heavy background studying biological anthropology at Baylor University and entered into a doctorate of kinesiology program and realized that that wasn't necessarily the path that I wanted to go down. While I loved the physiology of humans and understanding how people interacted with one another, I really wanted to have a lot more variety and challenge in what I was doing. And that's how I ended up landing in product marketing, which is a great role if you like challenges. But the way I started is I left grad school, I went into a couple of direct selling roles, 2 account executive roles, then transitioned into marketing, sales enablement, and eventually product marketing here at Quantum Metric. And that last bullet, maybe the most interesting, I'm very opinionated about barbecue, and I'll actually show you why that matters for our discussion today. So I'm from Austin, Texas, self-proclaimed and objective barbecue capital of the world. If you just tuned out because you're from North Carolina or Kansas City, I'm really sorry, and you'll probably hate the rest of the discussion, but that's all right. This really matters for today's discussion because we're going to use a story. We're going to use an analogy of barbecue. It's one of my favorite because barbecue, just like great relationships with sales, takes time and effort. And it takes a lot of passion as well. Cooking great barbecue is low and slow, and it takes that time and it takes energy, and you have to invest that same thing into the relationship. So since we're riding with this analogy today, you're probably asking, okay, well, what are we cooking? So we're cooking brisket, and brisket is actually one of the hardest pieces of barbecue to cook. It's a huge cut of meat. It's really, really tough, and it takes a really long time to get it to render properly. That's kind of why it's known as, when you cook a brisket and you cook it well, you get kind of a thumbs up from some of those old school Texans. So let's get cooking on this brisket, and let's talk about the process for creating this field connection in tandem. So before we start cooking, it's really important to talk about the mindset that really enables relationship building. And then we're going to talk about how you scale those relationships. So before we get into any of the tactics, I want to talk about a woman named Tootsie. Tootsie, personal hero of mine. She is maybe one of the most, probably one of the most famous pit masters in the United States, definitely in Texas. So she runs a barbecue joint called Snow's Barbecue out in Lexington, Texas. They're only open on Saturday for like 6 hours, but if there's a culinary award out there, she's won it. But she probably even couldn't tell you which award she won. And that's because Tootsie doesn't have an ego. She's very down to earth. She's extremely approachable. She connects with all of her customers who come through the door, and she'd happily tell you her methods. It's nothing, that you wouldn't expect. It's just the way and the process by which she handles that. But what I really like about Tootsie is just her overall lack of ego and her ability to connect with people and her ability to build relationships so that when people are eating her food, they really can feel the passion and the love that she's put in all night, cooking low and slow. So we want to learn how to be like Tootsie from a mindset perspective, because that all starts with empathy and leaving your ego at the door. So I mentioned empathy, and that's because sales is really hard. It really is. I know, and of course I say that because I was in a direct selling role, but even if you haven't been in a direct selling role, there's a ton to remember. The environment's always changing. The competitive landscape is always changing. There's all these different marketing programs, from events to product launch to all of these things. And if you're selling to the enterprise, you're constantly navigating just a large amount of politics into any organization that you're selling into. So it's really important for us to leave the ego at the door, listen to the sellers, and truly understand their world. And there's a few really tactical ways that you can do this. So the first is what I would call the boots on the ground approach. So this sounds a bit tedious, but I promise you it can be done. I was employee 60 at Quantimetric. That was a couple of years ago. We since got $200 million in funding and have grown to 400. So we've hired a couple salespeople, as you could imagine. But I still make the effort for myself or a member of my team to connect with every single seller, every SE, AE, SDR that comes into the door. It's very important for us because this allows us to build that relationship. It shows that we're approachable, and it's really, showing that we care about them and their success, and we want to understand their world. Secondarily, if these folks are enterprise sellers, they probably know a ton about your customers and your target audience. So you need to get with them, understand where they've sold in the past, if they've sold to a partner or competitor, and just really understand them. I mean, this can just be a 10, 15-minute coffee, something very simple, but this means that this person will be reaching out to you. They'll see you as a valuable resource, and when you need to do the same, you'll have them as well. So it's really a thing of compounding returns. Past that, join calls. Really get boots on the ground. If you can ride along, I know that's a little bit different now, but if you can ride along in the future or just hop onto a call, that's a great way to learn, some of the challenges that sellers are dealing with. And then secondarily, leverage tools like Gong. Listen to a Gong call every day so you can really put yourself in the shoes of your customers. And then lastly, onboard like an AE. Product marketers at Quantimetric probably don't have, the simplest onboarding program because it's a ton of product knowledge. It's the marketing onboarding, but it's also the sales onboarding and the solutions engineering onboarding. But that's very important because that builds that empathy that we need to be successful and to maintain those relationships. So that's one part of the foundation of relationship building. And then secondarily, it's partnering with your revenue enablement team. So we're fortunate to have an incredible sales revenue enablement leader here at Quantimetric, and we try to do everything we can to support that team. So this means helping to craft some of that onboarding content. This means getting involved with onboarding ourselves. Across the team, we're running 4 different sessions, and that's helping us put a face to the programs that we care about, whether that's customer stories, pricing and packaging, compete. We're able to interact and engage with sales as they're going through that onboarding process. So it's really important that we're partnering with them, on the onboarding aspect of it, but also when it comes to just, ongoing enablement, whether that's a recurring thing that you have or whether it's a point in time thing for, say, a competitive update or a product launch. It's really important that we can go to the revenue enablement team and work together with them to get in front of the field. Okay, so that's mindset, a little bit of the prep. Now let's get cooking and talk about tools of the trade. So, if I look back, as Quantum was really scaling and we were trying to figure things out, which is what I'm really trying to do with this session, to show you that we're all figuring out, is we saw a few issues. We saw that marketers had their individual programs, partner teams had their programs, and they were all kind of hitting sales at once. And what we realized we needed to do was really create some dedicated channels that were dependable and reliable, predictable, because that's really makes it a lot easier for sales to find the information that they need and process the information they need to be successful. So let's talk about that really quickly. As I mentioned, your channels, a lot like your smoker, have to be consistent. They have to be reliable, and they have to be tended to often and tweaked often. You have to maintain the fire. I'm sorry for the Traeger fans, but you can't just set it and forget it. You always have to be optimizing and making sure that your channels are efficient as possible. And when I mention channels here, I'm talking about the internal channels. So let's talk through a few of those channels that we deploy here. So there's a few ways. Of course, you've got, direct messaging and things like that. But like I mentioned, we had the problem of a lot of people with their programs kind of putting out their agenda and what they wanted to do, which is great, but it's not easy for sales to consolidate what exactly matters on a weekly basis. So we created a weekly enablement newsletter. This joint effort between product marketing, content teams, and the revenue enablement teams, where we consolidate all the updates from freshly baked content to new events, product updates, market intelligence, put it into one email that's referenceable, searchable, and then we cross post that to Slack as well. We also have weekly intelligence updates in this regard. So we're creating that reliability that sales can come to look for. Secondarily, I know it seems a little bit goofy, but this is very helpful for us, is purpose-built Slack channels. So you have Slack channels for outbound communication where product marketing is saying, hey guys, here's new content, new programs or something, pricing update that we need you to be aware of. And then we have two-way channels, typically used more in like a compete type environment where we can actually have a dialogue with sales and really have them drive some of the conversation within those channels as well. So kind of by, of course it doesn't always work perfectly, but by kind of designating the one-way, two-way channels, where to go to for what, and, also referencing that in onboarding, it really helps to coordinate our efforts and make these channels more effective. And then lastly, we've got our recurring enablement sessions that we partner with, again, with the enablement team, in which we're bringing, new product updates, market updates. We're going through some win-loss analysis in here as well. And we're often bringing voices from the field in everything that we're doing here. So whether it's an SE who had a great call or a great demo, or an SE who really understood, hey, here's how we differentiate against this competitor, we're using those internal voices to drive the efficacy of these channels, because it's not just us grandstanding and saying, here's what we think, guys. It's saying, here's the voices from the field. And then when you get that, you get more adoption from your go-to-market organization. That really becomes a force multiplier for any program that you have. Okay, so great. We've got the fire going. It's burning nice and slow. But how do we keep it going, and how do we know that we're on track, that the temperature's right, that everything's cooking properly? So again, that goes back to that foundation we talked about initially of mindset, because then you're approachable, you're available, and sales will get in touch. Trust me, they're salespeople. If you're doing your job right and connecting with all the salespeople, they'll find you. Call, Slack, text, email, carrier pigeon. Doesn't really matter. And then we're also just constantly getting feedback. Like I just mentioned there, you're going to be getting feedback if you have that relationship built. But we also do regular and recurring surveys to understand, hey, how's the content working for you? How are some of these programs working for you? General, feedback on things like pricing or compete programs. But also, it's really understanding that all feedback is good feedback, because we're going to get a lot. It's not all going to be actionable, but it helps us get it at a regular cadence and start to identify some trends that we can either ramp up a certain channel, produce more of a certain piece of content, but it really helps us understand what's happening with the field and then what's happening, subsequently with our customers. Okay, so we've talked about mindset and foundation and how that's so important for relationship building with sales. We've talked about some of the channels, some of the things that we've deployed and how that's been helpful for us, hopefully helpful for you. Now let's talk about the fun stuff, the deliverables. So I want to remind you, and I'm sure you know, that PMMs are always selling. So when it comes to great programs, great brisket, the product that you're putting out there matters. I'm sure this police officer agrees as well. The ingredients matter, and we constantly have to be selling the value of what we're doing. So the channels, the smoker, whatever you have, doesn't really matter if you don't have compelling content to put in it. You can have, a great smoker, but if you don't have a good cut of beef, it doesn't really matter. So we need content and programs that are adopted, and let's talk about some of the ways that we can do that. So good brisket comes from happy cows. Happy cows need farmers that pay attention to detail, that don't use pesticides, that give a lot of free range attention to their cattle. I could go on for days, but I promise you I won't do that. At the end of the day, they're really proud of what they bring to market, and they pay attention to detail. us as product marketers, we need to have that same exact mindset to make sure that we're delivering top quality programs to sales. So I know attention is the detail is probably very obvious for a lot of product marketers, but at least for me, I learned the importance of attention to detail on certain things, because it's always a balance of how efficient can we be, but how much attention to detail can we pay, and then how high fidelity is the product. So for us, it's just a matter of making sure that we're really proud of what we're getting out there, because at the end of the day, that's the representation of our brand and how well our programs and our content are adopted. So we need to be ready to go when we're delivering anything, whether it's a dedicated enablement session or it's just a couple of slides in an all hand. We need to be really, really passionate about what we're delivering and get people bought in to the value that we provide. So there's a couple of ways that you can pay attention to detail and ensure great quality along the way. And oftentimes, probably surprise, surprise, that means bringing sales along for the ride. So in order for our programs to be valuable, they need to be perceived as valuable, adopted, and then distributed to the correct channels that actually drive business outcomes. So how do we hit the mark regarding adoption? There's a few different ways. Whenever we're delivering something, like I mentioned before, we're constantly gathering feedback. So if we have a new piece of content, collateral, a new enablement session, or an adjustment we've made to a certain program, we call out who helped us drive that decision, what feedback we got, and how important that is to us. And we really highlight that person and thank them, because their voice does matter, and we want to show that that matters to continue that perpetual feedback loop. And then secondarily, we bring them into the messaging creation process. I use messaging as a good example because I think it's one of those really collaborative exercises that you do together. This is often accompanying a product launch or something along those lines. If you're trying to put together really differentiated messaging that stems out to everything, bring AEs and SEs in. Ask them for their feedback. Really make sure that they're at the table so that when you're taking this program to your internal audiences and you're delivering an enablement session, you have the voice of a lot of different people within the organization. It's not just you saying, hey guys, here's what we should do because I believe it. It's because, Bill, Jake, Derek, everyone else, Sally is bought in, and they're helping you to deliver that message. You're just making sure that they're staying on message and really kind of coordinating that symphony, but that's what's helping you drive adoption. And then lastly, like I just mentioned, using those voices from the field really creates realness, because it's letting seller see to seller, hey, if we take this message to market, this is going to be good for us. It's going to help us hit our number, going to help us create customer value. So it's about having those internal voices, but it's also about bringing the customer voice as well. And oftentimes sales is a great resource for that, because they can help you really understand the customer problem that we're trying to understand with a certain product and really make that dead simple and clear when we're talking through some of that messaging. So for this, when you want your programs to be adopted and perceived as truly valuable to the sales organization and really use them as a force multiplier because they buy in to what you're doing, bring them to the table early, often, get as much feedback as you can. So those are the three things that we'd said we learn. But I do want to talk a little bit to a bonus about, okay, that's great if we do those things, but what's going to help us sustain that? And that's really about environment, and it's an environment of alignment. So it needs to be conducive to success, and you need to have alignment from the top down, and I'll kind of explain that. So, to this point, we've been really talking about things that's within our locus of control as product marketers. But sometimes, you may have sales and marketing leaders that aren't as aligned as you want them to be, and we have to constantly push and influence for sales and marketing to be aligned. This means those leaders can't care about vanity metrics. They have to care about what impacts the customer, some of the top line corporate objectives, such as, just everybody aligned to revenue and customer value. And then you boil it down from there and focus on the right things together. Because when you can align those teams and sales and marketing are working hand in hand, they care about the same thing, their objectives are completely aligned, it makes it so much easier to do the things that I was just talking about, because they're not fighting through any politics. So how do we get started with this? Well, the best way to look at it is just a through line of corporate objectives. So connect the company or corporate objectives to the work that you're doing every day. So when you're building out, you could even start, with your team goals, you look at company objectives. You align those OKRs, whether they're quarterly or on an H1, H2 based system, to what the corporate strategy is for that year or for that 6 months. And then from that OKR perspective, you boil down the individual tasks that you or your team are doing on a weekly, bi-weekly basis. So this means if you're just, updating or creating a new solution sheet, you can point to the corporate objective that's supporting. And that alignment is super, super important so that sales and marketing can really work together. Okay, guys, let's wrap up. Let's review. So we talked about building the foundation for a great relationship by dropping your ego at the door and really focusing on having an approachable product marketing brand. Then we talked about those consistent channels that help you deliver the programs to the field and the power and importance of having content that is both valuable and perceived as valuable and therefore adopted by the go-to-market organization. So this tactic involves bringing in sales early into the creation process for any of these programs. And then lastly, we talked about how top-level sales and marketing alignment is really going to make the whole environment much more conducive to your success. And then lastly, be like Tootsie. I think that's the one takeaway you can have. And, just like the late, great Anthony Bourdain said, it's just a start. Get started. Take one of these tactics, do something tomorrow, next week, next quarter, and start that way towards a great relationship with sales. So I really appreciate everybody for taking the time to listen. I hope you got something valuable out of this discussion. Feel free to connect with me. Again, my name's Trevor. Shoot me an email. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm here, and I'm always happy to talk brisket if you'd like as well. Thank you all so much.